You're in the bullpen. You might want to watch where you're stepping. Here's American Shorthorn Association CEO Montie Soules.
Well, welcome to another edition of the Shorthorn Bull Pen. We're here in San Antonio, Texas at the National Cattlemen's Beef Association Trade Show and Convention. And today we've got a guest with us, Brian Bertelsen from the US Premium Beef. You know, Brian's from Dodge City, but their headquarters are actually in Kansas City, just down the road from our office here. So, Brian, tell us a little bit. Tell us your title and what you do, and about U.S. Premium Beef. I don't think a lot of people really know what U.S. Premium Beef can offer.
Sure. So, my title is Vice President of Field Operations. So we only have about 8 people on the whole staff.
Okay.
So we're all kind of in charge of something. But my area is analyzing our data, visiting with our producers, on site, over the phone, at meetings, sharing with them how the cattle are performing, how the grid works, and the value-based grid, and throw out suggestions, whatever might apply, for management, nutrition, genetics to improve their cattle. The company is about 27 years old. I started a couple months into operation. So in December of 1997, we harvested our first animals on the program. Prior to that, we had a what we called the Blue Sky Tour, where they convinced producers to invest money in what was then a co-op that at that time eventually purchased part of Farmland National Beef. Since then, we've transferred over to an LLC in ownership of what is now National Beef Packing Company, the 4th largest packer in the United States. And so we are a producer-owned company that owns part of National Beef. We have producers that are owners and share in the profits. In other words, when National Beef makes money, they have an opportunity to make money. We have producers that deliver cattle because we have a cattle delivery agreement, and we supply about 25% of the cattle that are harvested at National Beef plants. And any of those are going to be on a value-based grid. So we're not negotiating, we're not buying cash cattle. We are simply lining up grid cattle that'll be harvested at the processor that we have ownership in.
So you don't really care what color they are?
No, not really. Our Kansas grid, we'll have some people that'll ship 100% non-black cattle. We certainly offer premiums for certified Angus and certified Hereford, but we try to give producers freedom to do what they want, what they feel is best. But our job really is to hold a target for them to shoot at. And the way I like to describe it is, well, you hit the bullseye, you get a lot of money. You miss the target entirely, you're going to get less.
Maybe a whole lot less.
Sometimes. On individuals, absolutely, or on a specific group. But we have large and small feed yards, we have backgrounders, we have commercial ranchers that are retaining ownership, and some seed stock suppliers that are owners and participants. They're all involved with marketing fed cattle.
Okay.
Some of the seed stock suppliers are primarily working with their bull customers, and they might own delivery rights that they lease to their customers. So the 2 requirements for us to buy fed cattle from anyone is, 1, we ask them to become an associate member. We have to pay cattle in the name of an associate member, which could be the feed yard. We pay the feed yard pays the owner of the cattle, which is often done on the cash market as well. The other requirement is that every animal is tied to a delivery right. So this is part of our cattle delivery agreement with National Beef. There's a set number of delivery rights. Most of the Kansas delivery rights are owned by producers. So a lot of people are using their own delivery rights, but if they have extras, they can lease them to someone else. They can turn them over to us, we'll lease them out for them. That's been a big benefit to flexibility.
Okay. So how many head of cattle would you run through your program in a year in U.S. Premium Beef?
It's over 800,000 head a year.
Okay. Significant.
Yeah. And those are cattle delivered to either Dodge or Liberal, Kansas. Those are two of National Beef's large packing plants that would harvest in the neighborhood of 6,000 head a day, double shifted plants. And then there's a smaller plant in central Iowa, Tama, Iowa, that that would maybe harvest 1,100 head a day. And that plant is a black-hided only plant. And that's not so much just that we are prejudiced towards those breed of cattle, but it's also a way to operate a smaller plant less inefficiently. Everything qualifies for an Angus brand, including trimmings, middle.
So you can build a premium out of those cattle if they'll grade and hit the grid that you need them to.
Yeah, and just packing plant economics. I spend a lot of time in our plants working with National Beef personnel, and I give some tours to some of our producers, and I like to remind them that when you take those carcasses to fabrication, they all have to be the same. So not only do they all need to be the same quality grade, but if you're running, you're going to run your black-hided cattle carcasses together that might qualify for Angus brand A, B, C, D, E, whatever. You're going to run your certified Herefords separately, and then your commodity cattle.
So if you got commodity cattle or Hereford or Angus, it doesn't really matter. Do you have other branded programs besides those two that you're hitting the grid for that really doesn't matter as long as they hit the carcass grid that you're looking for?
So those are the two that we have a premium for currently on the grid.
Okay.
Now, National Beef would have a number of other brands. For example, they have one that's called High Plains Heritage. That's a newer, and maybe 3, 4, 5 years old now. CAB and Certified Hereford that we pay a premium for are the upper 2/3, and this is the upper 1/3.
Okay. So it's even a bigger premium, supposedly.
Well, no premium back to the producer.
Oh.
So that and
Okay, so
CAB
that just goes to the feeder or the whoever owns the cattle at that time.
No, just to the packer.
Just to the packer. Okay, so they're making the money on the quality of that animal.
Yeah. So producers sometimes will ask, how come I not get paid for that brand? Or another example would be CAB within the prime grade. Mm-hmm. Okay, so I explained to them that really what we're talking about is trickle down economics.
Right.
But the pile of money has to be big enough for that trickle to flow consistently. And so it's easy to create a new brand and sell middle meats, but that's only roughly 20-25% of the carcass, something like that. So if that's all you're marketing on brand X, you got to have a really big premium to have a good pile of money.
Yeah.
More likely you need to market a bigger percentage of the carcass. So it's the combination of those two. How much is your premium per pound on the meat that you're selling, and then how much of each carcass? And so when a packer needs more cattle that qualify for program X, they offer a premium for it. So some of those brands, yes, you're getting enough.
You'll get paid. You'll get paid some, but not. But the payment really goes back to the packer on those off brands.
Yeah. So prime, obviously, you're getting the prime premium. That's the highest price that we pay.
So what percentage of the cattle that you guys would handle would be prime?
National average is about 10. Our Kansas cattle are like 8, just a little bit below, actually. And our Iowa cattle are like they were record high last year at 28.
Ooh, that's pretty high.
Yeah.
Okay, but that's more specialized and smaller.
That's corn belt feeders.
Yep.
And an only black-hided plant.
Okay. So if you look at your genetics or the suggestions, as you said earlier, or guidance that you can help producers and feeders find cattle that are going to grade better and make more money for them, what's the biggest driver? So the gainability or the grade?
Well, it's really both. But when we talk about premiums, I mean, that's the world that I live in, is the premiums, the kill sheets that they get back. And then we summarize their data, and I summarize their total company data. So what we do is we like to quote, what our overall premium is. And what I mean by that is we're comparing our payment on the grid versus the alternative of what if those cattle were sold at the average cash market the week before they were harvested. Okay, so that's that divided by the number of heads. So our average last year was like $78 a head, more than if they were sold cash, average. But then I think one of the best teaching tools is that we have broke that down to show them, well, where did that $78 come from? And every year but one, quality grade. Quality grade is the biggest component of overall. The second is dressing percentage.
Interesting.
And the reason for that is, we're a carcass-based pricing system on value-based grid, but we still compare back to what if they sold cash live. So you got carcass divided by live weight is dressing percentage. So I might describe that as, well, that's the benefit of selling carcass weight at a carcass price versus live weight at a live price.
Yeah. So when you sit there and look at your $78 a head that you've looked at on an average, is that the driver that you can get people to buy in and use U.S. premium beef because that's the way they need to sell it? So my ignorance, I guess, would be the word to say, why doesn't everybody sell on a grid? Unless you got inferior cattle, but
there are pluses and minuses to all the different options, and there's a lot of different options, especially today with record high cattle prices.
Yeah.
So obviously the cash market, you know what you're going to get.
Yeah.
You say yes or no, but really, let's face it, you're generally offered a price, and it's do you take it or not?
Yeah.
Right?
You're not negotiating.
Right. And the frustrating thing about that sometimes is that you might sell cattle on the cash market today, and you might not be able to ship them for several weeks or more.
Yeah.
So that can be a frustration. With our system, I would argue, and I tell people that you actually can get paid for the extra days, but you're going to decide when they go because you're standing the premiums and discounts.
Okay.
So I will never twist anybody's arm to say, hey, you really need to ship your cattle next week. If they say, well, I think I want to wait a little bit longer, I would say, well, okay. As long as they aren't building up a reputation of a lot of really, really, really big cattle with heavyweight discounts or excessively fat.
Okay, so when you say heavyweight discounts, as we share with a lot of folks here, what would be the weight that you would get to have a heavyweight discount?
Our Kansas grid heavyweights don't start until they weigh 1101 and above.
On a carcass.
And we also give you a 4% allowance.
Okay, so transfer that to a live weight. Would you on a carcass?
At an average yield, that'd be somewhere in the neighborhood of like 16 and a half.
Okay.
Now, and a lot of people look at that and say, well, I'm not going to have any in that weight range. But it can be from an animal that instead of yielding a normal 63, 64, that individual animal yields 66, 67.
Yeah, and then you go over.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I tell people, I'm joking, but I'm not joking. Heavyweights are a nice problem to have. You're selling a lot of weight. And if you look at the dollars, even with a discount, if you look at the dollars of those individual animals, and it's right there on your sheet, every animal has grading dollars per 100, dollars per head. If you look at those dollars per head, you're still cashing a pretty big check.
Yeah.
And some people would look at those results and say, darn it, I should have sold that that group of animals 2 weeks earlier before he got to heavy.
Yeah.
Well, you would have lost 2 weeks worth of carcass weight gain on the whole group.
Yeah. No,
And that's worth a lot nowadays.
Well, it's worth a lot, and a lot of people, when you look at even the market from feeder calves, I should say wean calves to feeder calves or background calves, and you go from 5 weights to 7 or 8 weights or 8 weights to 9 weights and on up to thousands or whatever you're going to sell them at. The more they weigh, the more money you got. And even though you might take a little less per pound or per 100, the more money you've got. And a lot of people don't realize that they're making more money. They're putting more in their pocket if they got more pounds to sell.
And I entered this job thinking that I was pretty smart. I got an advanced degree in nutrition, and I thought I was pretty smart. And I assumed that we were going to have a lot of antagonisms, where premiums might be going up, but performance might be going down, or cost of gain might be coming up. The reality is they generally work together. In other words, feeding cattle longer, you sell more pounds, you increase the marbling from whatever their genetic potential is today to 2 weeks later, right?
Yeah.
Now, your live cost of gain might go up.
Right.
However, you're now selling carcass weight.
Right.
But we still traditionally measure live cost of gain. And I've done the math, and I've shown our producers that what you really need to be thinking about is carcass cost of gain. And at the end of the feeding period, throughout the feeding period, your dressing percentage increases as you feed those cattle longer. And so that's an added benefit. With these high prices, one more week's feed on those cattle, just from a weight standpoint, can be about $25 to $30 a head alone. And that's not even assuming that anybody crosses a line or moves up a rung on the ladder of value, in other words, quality grade.
Yeah. And there's more chance to go up if you fed them a little longer.
Absolutely.
So when you look at you're looking at a lot of things when you bring these cattle in on the grid and their production, and you're following these cattle from producers. You've got you know your guys that you're getting these cattle from.
To a degree, yeah.
You kind of know what they're going to look like after a few years of what they're doing, of the genetics they're using. Do you give them any guidelines, or do they ask for guidelines of what kind of bulls I should be using? What should I be looking at, and the genomics, and should I be adding more ribeye area, or should I be adding more marbling, or what areas do you help them make those selections?
We do. If I notice that someone is having a problem, I will certainly call them and suggest some things. Some people will proactively call me and ask me. And anytime I'm giving them a suggestion, that's all it is.
Right, I understand.
And I tend to be the kind of person that I will give them the information to make their own decision, because it is their decision.
Sure.
So if you're a U.S. Premium Beef Associate member selling cattle in your name, as opposed to selling in the feed yard's name, if you sell your cattle in your name, at the end of that quarter, we're going to send you a summary. Here's all your cattle. Here's all of our total company average, and here's our top end, what we call our top 25%, the groups of cattle that have the highest premiums. And that, in and of itself, is a good indication for that producer. Oh, my cattle are good in this, they're not so good in that. And so that's where that might prompt a call. Hey, I'm not so good in this. What's the deal? Can I improve? What should I be doing? What am I doing wrong?
Is some of that not so good when you get into some of those areas of how they grade out, the way they were fed, or is it more genetics?
Well, it's both, but heritability measures the genetic impact on the final phenotype, and carcass traits are highly heritable.
Oh yeah.
But what's the value? Like 0.3, 0.35.
Yeah, it's high. It's one of the highest traits we select for.
Right. So what does that mean? That means that when you see all this variability in your carcass data, about a third of that is due to genetics.
Okay.
2/3 of it is due to management, environment.
Okay. That's a good rule of thumb for folks to look at sometimes.
Yeah.
And get a handle on what's going on.
So we had early on, we had I had a series of articles in our newsletter. I called it Recipe for Marbling, because we were easily seeing quickly that was a huge driver. That's the main driver of the price per pound. So yes, genetics was the first thing that we talked about. EPDs work. We've got plenty of data that's been shared from seed stock producers that compare EPDs versus their progeny carcass data, and yes, they work, especially on highly accurate EPDs from a proven AI bull.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah. No,
you guys know genetics and EPDs.
Totally makes sense.
Yep.
Just common sense. Really.
But then there's a long list of things that a producer could have influence on, and some of them are kind of obvious, like keep them healthy,
Sure.
adequate nutrition, and a lot of it is feed them long enough to get them to that fat point. I'll talk to people about growth promotants and implants, but again, it's really their choice as to what they use and how they do it.
So as you look at what we're doing in the market today, we're looking for heavier cattle, and in some cases, a lot of folks that are not maybe feeding cattle regularly don't keep a good handle on how big we want these cattle to be today. You know, they still may have this 1,300 pound steer in their mind, when we're really looking for that 1,500 pound steer.
Yeah.
You know, on a live weight basis. You know, you're looking at 1,100 pound carcasses. I can remember when they didn't want anything bigger than an 850 pound carcass. So you're going to have to feed them longer in some cases to get them there, other than our genetics have changed enough that these cattle can get there at a quicker rate and hopefully grade at the same time at that younger age. So what we've basically taken is, over the years, we've been able to move that 850 pound carcass to an 1,100 pound carcass, hopefully in the same time frame.
Yeah, so genetics are better. We're always working on nutrition at the feed yard and the growing phase. And when I started 27 years ago, there were a lot of our producers that were, I talk about their production schedule. In other words, you know, how do you manage them? Well, they were what I would call an aggressive calf fed program. Mm-hmm. And they would actually try to calve, instead of the spring, they would calve in like February, right, maybe even January, so that they could push those calves and harvest them in April, which is typically the high cash market of the year, right? Yeah. And I still contest that that's where the phrase calf feds don't grade came from, because everybody was just pushing, and we'll feed them until somebody buys them. As soon as they will take them, remember this is the old cash live system I'm talking about, and to try to sell them at a high price, which that was okay for back then. But then when they switched over to grid marketing and they were doing that, well, A, if they didn't get them fat enough, their grid results weren't fantastic. B, quality rewards are not the highest in April. If you look at the recent years, they're the strongest in the fourth quarter of the year, or at least in the latter half of the year. When they need them. So we have seen a lot of people on their own switch from that, say, February or even February-March calving to later spring. Less problems. With more backgrounding. Okay. And instead of shooting for April, which may end up being May, instead shooting for like maybe a September, October, November. Now, August is the low point of the year, typically. Right. Typically. And so there's a lot of things for these people to consider. There's quality rewards, there's seasonality of performance of the cattle, seasonality of the market, and all those things. And you know, there's a lot of reasons why people choose to raise the cattle under that certain production schedule that they want to choose. But what they've done is they've backgrounded the cattle. So when prices went up back in like 2014, it made perfect sense, and even before that, it made perfect sense to make yearlings out of those calves. Yeah, right, and you pick up a little more maturity in those cattle. Yeah, not a lot, but a little bit. There's some people that would still say, oh, they need to be a certain age to grade. I've never really subscribed to that entirely. The way I would describe it is, there's truth to it, but the way I would describe it is, an older animal has been on the earth more days to allow us to build marbling into the animal nutritionally. From a genetic standpoint, you can change them so that they'll grade and do at a younger age and do everything you need them to do. Yeah. So as you look at the history, and you've been in this business and been at this role for 27 years, mm-hmm. So you've seen a lot of changes. You know, and we're talking about the harvesting the cattle. We're talking about the consumption of cattle. So the conversation here, to me, is really quite interesting, that if I'm feeding any cattle or I'm raising any cattle or I got any cattle that I need to get fed out, why wouldn't I use U.S. premium beef and go to a grid value based? Because it just makes sense. Yeah, and that's why we're seeing more and more cattle throughout the industry marketed on alternative marketing agreements, grids, and formulas, and so forth. So we have a list of what we call qualified custom feedlots on our website. The qualified part means that they own these delivery rights that we were talking about. And so feeding at those feed yards means a better chance that you'll have access to the delivery rights provided by the feed yard to be able to market your cattle.
The feed yard would put you in connection, would put that producer or feeder in connection with U.S. premium beef.
Right, and they would lease their own delivery rights to the customer. When you start looking at individual groups of cattle or even a producer's average, that we have people that have been retaining ownership for even before we started.
Sure.
They've been working at it for a long time. There's some cattle that are 60, 70 or more percent prime.
Yeah.
And they're not on an all natural program.
No, I understand. We've had a couple, three producers that when they start quoting to me what their percent prime that they're getting, but it's generational. It's stacked. They know
It's not by accident.
No, they've disciplined themselves to it for years, and that's why they're there. And they're in the lead. They got the advantage.
Yeah. So your reward is pretty significant.
Yeah. No, it's worth the time and energy to put into it, to pay attention to your genetics of what you're going to do, and you'll get a return back on it. You'll get value back if you buy the better product.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter if you're buying the bull or if you're buying the consumer's buying the piece of meat.
Yeah. And manage the cattle right.
And yeah, you've always got to have.
I mean, it's really like selecting for high growth. Well, if you don't adequately feed your cattle nutrition, they're not going to gain to that potential. And marbling is even more so that way because, we talk about compensatory gain. You got cattle out on a droughted pasture, their performance drops. Well, you bring them into the pen, you feed them harvested feeds with grain in it. They take off like a house of fire. That's compensatory gain. But on marbling, there really is no compensatory gain. So if they have that period of time during droughted pasture, for example, where they don't deposit marbling, they're not going to resume and do it any faster than normal.
Right.
Genetics is going to be the sort gate where it goes.
Genetics are genetics, and even if I go back to many years back through raising purebred cattle, when you'd go through and you'd run a bunch of weaned bull calves through and run a marbling score on them, yeah, their marbling might go up when they become 12 or 13, 14 months old, but your best bulls were still the best bulls at 14 months. The high marbling bulls at weaning time were the high marbling bulls later. It's genetic.
I was taught in college, marbling is the last fat deposited before they're harvested. Well, we now know through research that it's much earlier in life.
Yeah, and I felt that with the shorthorn cattle. I put my little plug in for some shorthorn cattle because I think they've always been a pretty good marbling product. And what it amounts to is when we visually appraise them and then look at the carcass data we can get back on them from ultrasound work and everything, it sure looks to me like they'll put a little bit more marbling in, or they'll take care of marbling as a natural genetic asset before they'll put fat on their back. And sometimes some of them won't, of course, but it kind of looks like that. Well, that's a look. That's not studied. That's not you don't take it to the bank, folks. But I mean but that's a view that you can see when I start looking at little data and start looking at what these cattle are back fatting when they marble, when we get our ultrasound data in on them. These cattle are doing pretty good. So
the EPDs work. One other thing is, if producer retains ownership, feeds at one of those feed yards, if they put EID tags in their cattle, first of all, we'll pay them $1 a head just for the tag itself. We're going to encourage you to do it. And then you're going to get that data, all that data back. Quality grade, yield grade, carcass weight, dollars per head, dollars per hundred. And then what they do with it is really up to them. I'll certainly work with people on, well, what's most important? Again, what are you good at? So there's that, but there's also just EPD's work.
Yep.
on sire selection, and that's where most people are going to make their.
And that's what I think our customers need to understand. Our bull customers, our purebred people that are turning in the data and doing this carcass research data, it's all there. And what we've really learned today here visiting with Brian is quality does pay. Quality is essential, not only if you're going to buy the bull, but if you're going to eat the piece of meat. So it's all quality based, and you're going to get paid a premium for it. And we'll take a wrap for today here in NCBA in San Antonio, Texas at the Shorthorn Bull Pen.